Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you how to paint a basic cloud. I'll be using acrylics since they dry faster, and I wanted to show you this quick demonstration on here. The body of the cloud is going to have a range of colors, and so right now I'm painting the darkest part, the base, which will consist of basically a very desaturated purple. You can mix this however you like, but the paints I use for this are magenta, brown, blue, and some white. Magenta is a very strong color straight from the tube, so use it in a very small amount when mixing for this painting. Next, I go to the other extreme and paint the brightest part. I'm not using white directly, but mixing in a very small amount of yellow and orange. This bright part is obviously the part where the sun shines on it the most, and so as I continue painting this cloud, I will eventually create some transitions between these dark and light areas. Next, I mix a salmon orange color. It's a mix of some orange, magenta, brown, and white. Also, when it comes to mixing these colors, you don't have to get the exact color for each time you mix because that will take a long time. Besides, using color variety is important here anyways, so don't worry if your mixture isn't exactly the same as it was before. Right now, I'm painting these transitions between the darks and lights. Another thing to remember is that the shapes you paint now are not going to look anywhere near how they will turn out in the end. We are just focusing on laying out the foundational colors and shapes that we will be sculpting throughout this painting. The most important part about painting clouds is the use of blending. The surface of a cloud is amorphous, and so creating these transitions everywhere is important. Otherwise, the cloud will look choppy and rigid. Since these are acrylics I'm going to be using a lot of dry brushing and painting thin, transparent layers on here. With oil paints, you could do the same thing, but you're going to have to be more deliberate with layering the paint since it takes longer to dry. Now I'm using a lighter version of the salmon orange to create the smoother transition. This cloud will have different variations of light coming across it, with some areas having a more diffused form of light where the rounded areas will only partially reflect the light. I'm working my way from big to small, painting these large round shapes on here that I will break apart and create smaller clusters of light and dark. Once I get these large shapes smoothed out, I start to work on the smaller rounded lumps of this cloud. That's what makes cloud painting challenging. You have to paint smoothly and do lots of blending, yet you also have to have these small shapes and indentations inside the cloud that you have to get as well. Also, when you're painting, make sure to keep these shapes as random as possible. Avoid creating any patterns so you can make this painting as organic as possible. Okay, so now I'm going back to that desaturated purple mixture. This time I'm going to dig into these large shapes and break them down into smaller clusters inside this cloud. As you're painting this, be aware of the light source because you are essentially sculpting an object that has all these lumps and indentations with varying reflections of sunlight. I'm using a pretty wet and strong mixture here, but keep using the same mixture as you're painting because as it starts to get thinned out on the paintbrush, you can use this to your advantage by creating thinner and more transparent layers that can help you with your blending. After I do this, I go back to my salmon orange color and create some more transitions where I feel the need to, but this time they are going to be smaller in scale. Remember, work from big to small. I'm being more careful with where I paint these transitions, but also still being spontaneous with how I create these random shapes. The salmon orange color is actually going to serve two important purposes in this painting. Sometimes you'll use it to create the lighter parts of the dark areas, but other times you will use it to create the darker parts of the brightest areas. This value of color is relative to the area that it's used in. Now I'm getting a brighter version of the salmon orange and I'm going to add a few highlights. The idea here is to paint small shapes inside the large shapes, and this is pretty much how I'll be painting for the rest of this cloud. As I continue painting this, I will keep switching back and forth between different values to get all the shapes just right. Sometimes the variation of the values will be really subtle, so pay attention to the overall dark or light quality of your mixture. There are going to be a lot of subtle shifts of light on here, and this is why blending carefully is important. Now I get that orange mixture again and add a little bit of texture on these bright spots. Be careful not to have any sharp edges when you're doing this, but gently blend them and keep creating these random shapes and variations of light. You can start to see how this cloud is coming together slowly with adding layer upon layer. Then I'll go back to my bright mixture and smooth out some sharp edges. Whenever you have doubt about something you just painted, just do some blending and see if that helps because most of the time it does. Then with the same color I stack it partially on top of some of that texturing I did earlier. This is something I will keep doing in other places. Now I get the brightest mixture and add more highlights. Be careful not to go overboard with this because it does get pretty exciting to finally see these dynamic highlights on here, but you have to make sure to preserve the overall roundness of the cloud. Also, now that we are getting further into painting this, be more careful with how far you press your paintbrush on the canvas. Don't be as aggressive with brushing anymore. Then, once again, I switch back to my desaturated orange and work more on the transitions. One important thing I want to point out is to not be afraid to paint over some parts because it's easy to get kind of paranoid of messing up your artwork when you're this far into the painting. You take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that's the cycle of creating a work of art. So going back to the bright mixture, I do some more breaking down of the shapes because I felt that some of them had been too straight, and so I wanted to round them out some more. I hope you get the idea. Now you can see the importance of layering and creating these shapes. I think it's a good idea to not only think of yourself as a painter, but also as a sculptor, because that's what we're really doing here. We're kind of breaking down certain parts and then building them back up. So here in this last part, I want to get some more work done on the bottom part. Up until this point, we had too much contrast here without that much transition, so let's fix that real quick. The parts of the cloud that are away from the direct sunlight will tend to have the least sharpness, so you can easily do some blending here to create these wisps of vapor in these areas. I'm going over a few miscellaneous parts here as I close in on finishing, and I also spent a few minutes softening up any hard edges I have here. Make sure that the outline of the cloud has soft edges, including the bottom. So this is pretty much what it takes to paint a basic cloud. The way clouds look can vary a huge amount depending on the time of day, sunlight intensity, distance, and cloud type. I'm looking forward to making more videos on this topic. If you found this tutorial helpful in any way, leave a comment. Anyways, like and subscribe. I'll catch you later.